Coming up, the Panthers and Canadiens set an NHL record. This is the Locked On Game to Game NHL.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody. You are watching Locked On Game to Game NHL, local experts with the biggest stories on the ice. I'm your host, Daniella Bruce, and thank you for making Locked On Game to Game your first listen every weekday. The Panthers and Canadiens got off to a record-setting start with an NHL record, 10 combined goals in the first period alone. Florida scored 7 of those goals and finished with 9 for the night. Locked On Panthers goes over that scoring clinic.
The Florida Panthers, behind a 7-goal first period, carry them to a win. What is up, guys? Armando Velez from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and the Florida Panthers defeat the Montreal Canadiens by final score of 9-5 at FA Live Arena. And despite the Florida Panthers giving up the first goal to Montreal 16 seconds in, and this being tied, Habs go to the lead again, but after it was 3-3, the Florida Panthers took off. That 7-goal first period was a franchise record for goals in a period. The Florida Panthers now have a franchise record for goals against a single opponent in a 3-game span, with 22 against Montreal. That's including 8 power play goals on the season. Need I say more? Matthew Tkachuk with his 3rd straight 3-point game. The Florida Panthers are playing great at the right time, as they have now won their 4th game of this 7-game homestand, 4-1-1, with an opportunity to make it 5 on Saturday against the New Jersey Devils. Aaron Ekblad gets on the scoreboard, including twice on the power play, and 15 different point scorers for the Panthers on the night, as it was just an offensive barrage for this Florida Panthers team. And that's considering also that Sergei Bobrovsky let 3 goals in on his first 3 shots too. So the Florida Panthers, they use that offense for them to make this out of hand early. So listen to my recap of this 9-5 win for the Florida Panthers. Make sure to listen to my next episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Your team every day.
Timo Meier scored a pair of goals for the Devils, but New Jersey still lost to the Lightning in a shootout. Locked On Devils looks at the reasons Jersey came up just short.
What's up? This is Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils, and here is my post-game reaction. So, the New Jersey Devils came out on the losing end once again to the Tampa Bay Lightning, this time by a score of 4-3. Now, the good news is they were able to walk away with a point because they lost in a shootout. So, adversity did hit the Devils somewhat early because they went down 1-0 to begin the game, thanks to a questionable icing call. And then Tomas Tatar was able to tie it. And then Devils go on 5-on-3 advantage in period number 2. They weren't able to capitalize on that. The Tampa Bay Lightning were able to kill it off. And as a result, they were able to score not long after they got back at full strength. But thanks to Timo Meier and his clutchness in period number 3, the Devils were able to tie it, send it to OT, couldn't do anything with it. And then they go into a shootout. And unfortunately, the Devils do struggle in that sort of aspect when it comes to the shootout. So at least they got a point. But at the same time, I'm sure they would have liked to get those 2 points against a playoff caliber team like the Tampa Bay Lightning. But Timo Meier, it's worth mentioning, he got his 2nd goal on the 6-on-4 advantage. So beautiful play call by Lindy Ruff in that sort of aspect when time was winding down in period number 3.
The Predators couldn't get anything by Chicago goalie Alex Stalock until the 3rd period, and Nashville took home a loss as a result. Locked On Predators tells us what kept the Nashville offense from getting going.
The Nashville Predators lost their chance to earn 2 points as they fell to the Chicago Blackhawks tonight by a score of 2-1. Hey everyone, Ann Kimmel from Locked On Predators here. Look, this was not the Predators' best performance they've had since the trade deadline by any stretch of the imagination. The team really just didn't have it in the tank tonight. They couldn't capitalize on their power play chances, and Chicago took advantage of Nashville's mistakes. Both of the Blackhawks Blackhawks goals came off of turnovers by the Predators, and Nashville simply couldn't finish on the offensive chances that they generated, including a missed penalty shot by Matt Duchene. Roman Josi did get the team within one goal with less than a minute to go in the game, but Nashville just ran out of time to come back in this one. It's really hard to see those 2 points slip through Nashville's fingers, as the Preds are still 4 points behind Winnipeg in the wild card race, and Nashville faces an uphill climb. They have the second hardest strength of schedule remaining in the regular season. Preds are going to have to shake off this tough loss and prepare for their next game, a Saturday afternoon showdown against those Winnipeg Jets.
Coming up, the Bruins keep rolling on the road. This is Locked On Game to Game NHL. The midway point of the NBA season has come and gone, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything and anything from the money line to point scores and even threes drains. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Don't miss out on the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NHL. I'm your host, Daniella Bruce, and thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Bruins got a shutout win on the road on Thursday night, with Jeremy Swayman stopping all 36 Jets shots that came his way in net. Locked On Bruins and Jets have both sides of the Boston win in Winnipeg.
The Boston Bruins got back to their winning ways here on Thursday night, defeating the Winnipeg Jets by a score of 3-0. This is Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins, and it was some depth players who stood up offensively for Boston, with goals coming from Trent Frederick, Pavel Zacha, and then an empty netter from Thomas Nosek. Jeremy Swayman made 35 saves in the game for his shutout win. If there was one dark spot for the Bruins, it was an injury suffered by Derek Forbort, the defenseman, who had to leave after blocking a shot in the second period. But the good news is, after 2 straight losses, 3 losses in their past 4, the Boston Bruins rebounded with a big win over a pretty good Winnipeg Jets team, and they'll now head to Minnesota to take the Wild on Saturday.
I'm sure Jets fans were probably expecting a loss to the Boston Bruins because, well, the Bruins might be one of the best NHL teams in NHL history. So, a 3-0 loss, you might look at this and say, well, you know what? The Jets weren't blown out. They actually at times played evenly to the Boston Bruins. It wasn't that bad of a game, maybe even impressive in some respects. But I think for me, there are some structural problems with the way the Jets are creating offense or not creating offense that makes me a little bit concerned for the postseason. Hellebuck was fine, I think. The Jets defense was relatively okay. But when it came to offensive creation, that's where I think Winnipeg might have a couple of big question marks heading into the playoffs. We'll dive into that in more detail on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. I'm your host, Harrison Lee. You can join us at Locked On Jets on your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe right now. As always, thanks for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.
After the Oilers took care of the Stars in Edmonton, the Locked On hosts from both teams recapped the 4-1 win for Connor McDavid and company.
Well, it wasn't the Stars who shined in Edmonton, as it was the role players for the Oilers who rolled over the Dallas Stars at Rogers Place. Hi, my name is Brett Holden from Locked On Oilers, and yes, I know, Connor McDavid did score his 57th goal of the year and his 131st point, but it was Matthias Janmark, yes, the former Dallas Star himself, who led the Edmonton Oilers in scoring in this one, scoring 2 of the Edmonton Oilers' 4 goals in this one, beating the Dallas Stars 4-1 at home. Now, this is his 4th goal of the season against his former team, the Dallas Stars, but it doesn't stop there. Against all of his former teams, 6 of his 8 goals of the season have come against the Vegas Golden Knights, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Dallas Stars. But it wasn't just Janmark getting the love for the Oilers, as it was McLovin, Warren Foegele getting the scoring started in this one. He scores his 4th point in the last 5 games. He is hot, and so is Evan Bouchard. He gets 2 assists in this one, his 8th point in his last 8 games. 8 games ago, his brand new defensive partner, Matthias Ekholm, became an Edmonton Oiler. I don't know, maybe a little bit of a connection. Stuart Skinner backstopping the Oilers to another big win in this one, stopping 25 of the 26 fired his way, improving the Oilers' record to 38, 23-8, and they look to improve on that record as they head to Seattle for a 2 p.m. matinee puck drop on Saturday afternoon.
The Dallas Stars are beginning to run out of gas on the road as they fall in Edmonton by a score of 4-1. Hey, everybody, Dane Lewis with the Locked On Stars podcast. And the Stars were just flat out beat on Thursday night by a team that just had much more firepower ready to go. And Jake Ottinger, despite his best efforts, left out to dry by his team. The Stars loaded the Oilers' power play 4 times, which the Oilers did only execute once. But that time that they did execute was at a crucial point in the game. The Stars had cut the Oilers' lead in half. Wyatt Johnston with his 19th goal of the season. Not too shabby for the 19-year-old rookie. But then just mere minutes after that goal from Johnston, the Stars commit their final penalty of the game, which sends the Oilers on the man advantage, and Connor McDavid gets his 57th of the season, putting the game out of reach for the Dallas Stars. And they've now fallen to 3-2 on this 6-game road trip, and they'll be looking to finish above 500 on Saturday in Calgary, but that's going to be easier said than done as the Stars just look worn out. They seem to have exerted most of their energy early on in this trip and seem to kind of just be hanging on by a thread here as the race in the Central Division is starting to heat up. Despite getting players back like Luke Glendening, they're still without Tyler Seguin and also still without Mason Marchment. And say what you want about those players, but I think we can see from these past few games how valuable those guys can be in terms of keeping the intensity high in a game, because it just really felt like at times the Stars were not as dialed in, not as focused as the Edmonton Oilers. And I think that showed all over the ice as the Stars are outshot. And even, the hits tied at 27, just a game that I really feel like the Stars were just one step behind through the entirety of the contest. And they got to find a way to pick up one more win on this trip before heading home, and then try to carry some momentum from there, because this is going to be a brutal final few weeks of the season in terms of the race for the West and the Central Division. But we'll be talking about this game in its entirety on Friday's episode of Locked On Stars and making a case for Wyatt Johnston and the Calder Trophy on Friday's episode of Locked On Stars. Can't wait to see you there.
The Canucks took a tough loss on the road to the Coyotes, ending that Vancouver win streak at 5 games. After the loss, Locked On Canucks looks at what went wrong in Arizona.
And just like that, the Canucks' longest winning streak of the season is coming to an end. And as everyone predicted, it came against the Arizona Coyotes. The Canucks lose 3-2 to the Arizona Coyotes. I'm Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks. And I think the most interesting thing from a Canucks perspective in this game is we saw Tocchet tinker with the lines a little bit. I mean, his lineup basically remained untouched throughout that winning streak, which makes sense. But in that third period, we saw Podkolzin play with Miller a little bit. We saw Garland replace Kuzmenko on the top line. We even got a little bit of lotto line action there in the third period. And even though the Canucks registered a few chances in that third period, controlled play, they couldn't beat young Ivan Prosvetov. We'll talk about the weekend ahead. The Canucks play the Kings and the Ducks Saturday and Sunday. Kyle and I got you covered on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Canucks.
The Flames scored a touchdown and easily took care of the Golden Knights in Vegas last night. Locked On Flames tells us what got into the Calgary offense in the win.
The Calgary Flames won big tonight in Las Vegas, at T-Mobile Arena. Hello, everyone, and I'm the host of Locked On Flames, Jess Belmosto, and tonight was quite the night for the Calgary Flames. They were looking to bounce back after losing to the Arizona Coyotes in overtime earlier this week, and tonight they made a statement, and this was after several line changes and scratches and adjustments, and they ended up walking away with 2 points and coming within 3 points of a playoff spot. So, are the Calgary Flames back? We'll find out in the next game.
Vince Dunn provided the game-winning goal in overtime for the Seattle Kraken as they beat the San Jose Sharks in San Jose. Locked On Sharks recaps that home loss out in California.
Stop me if you've heard this before. James Reimer was stellar, and the Sharks lose in overtime. I'm Jade Young of Locked On Sharks, and the Sharks fall 2-1 in overtime to the Seattle Kraken. James Reimer stopped 30 of 32 shots, but Vince Dunn got the best of him in overtime. William Eklund scored his second career NHL goal, this time on a penalty shot to give the Sharks the lead in the third period, but the Kraken stormed back and eventually won in overtime. As we've seen with most Sharks games this season, anytime something could go wrong catastrophically, it does go wrong catastrophically, and that was how the Kraken scored tonight. So we'll have a full breakdown of tonight's game, talk about William Eklund and if he has earned the right to continue to play past his 9 games this season. So all that and more on your next episode of Locked On Sharks.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NHL and your team's Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Daniella Bruce, and this has been Locked On Game to Game.